Saluting the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Kathy, would you do a roll call for us, please?
Yes. Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Ricucci?
Here.
Mr. Brentnall?
Here.
Mr. Denayo?
Here.
Mr. Sevison? Mr. Gray?
Here.
Mr. Moss?
Here. Thank you. Report from our planning director.
Good to see you. Okay, so coming up on the October 11th Planning Commission meeting, the headquarters RV park, that was an item that was continued from the August 9th Planning Commission meeting. Also on that agenda is the extension of time for the Rainbow Holdings Company bulk water sale. That's a conditional use permit. And a temporary conditional use permit for the Creekside Charter School. That's up in the West Shore in Tahoe. That's actually in the old county administration building where we used to be before we moved over into the Customs House. On the October 25th / November 8th Planning Commission hearing, depending on how it works out, North Star Highlands Unit 2, that's a conditional use permit modification to readjust some land use on that project. There is a Red Dog replacement lift in Squaw Valley that's going forward, and the Squaw Valley Coaster, a project proposal. That's a conditional use permit. And recent board actions, September 11th, the board approved the First Amendment to the Placer Vineyards Restated Development Agreement. That was heard by your commission. And coming up, October 11th, the Orchard at Penryn project. That was appealed. That decision was appealed from your commission. And on October 23rd, board agenda, that's in Tahoe. And what we're looking at is an update to the Tahoe Community Plan. Consider a amendment to the North Tahoe Area General Plan on a shared use trail. That was heard by your commission on the 30th, and so that's going forward to the board, as well as consider county code amendments on liquid petroleum gas from the building divisions. And if you want a copy of that, I'd be happy to provide that to your commission just so for your review. Mickey, I'm sure you might be interested in that. And then November 6th board hearing, we'll be requesting direction on the Sheridan Community Plan update. So there you have it. Any questions?
Yeah. Squaw Valley Coaster, just a little.
Alpine Coaster, it's a roller coaster that comes down the side of a hill. I don't know, they're kind of big in Europe, I think.
Did they used to have one in Boreal like that?
Was there one in Boreal? Yeah, I think so. I think the one in Boreal was in a tube, where this one is elevated kind of a little bit above the ground on rails, and it kind of scoots down the hillside, and it has some type of mechanical system that takes it up to the top, and then people get on and rail down the side of the mountain.
Yeah. Was the trail, was that appealed, or is that just a zoning change that they're looking at?
It was not. Your approval held up, and the only thing that's going forward at this point is the amendment to the community plan. So that's what the commission or the board will be looking at. So that's pretty exciting. So that'll be a good project. Anything else? Great. Thank you, guys.
Okay, now it's time for public comment. If anybody would like to make comments to the commission that are not involving items on today's agenda, now would be the time to do so. Okay, seeing none, we have a consent item on the agenda. Somebody would like to make a motion for that? Second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Congratulations, Ken.
Before we leave that item, once upon a time, numerous years ago, the Planning Commission sat down with the director and we went through the list of appointments that the Planning Commission individuals are required to fulfill. At that time, I was appointed to the Solid Waste Force Task something or other. And I go to these meetings and they're fascinating. I'm just wondering if it's not time to revisit that, take a refreshing look at all these things that are additional duties, like this one that we just nominated Ken to. Ken, you've probably been on this since you first got here. Yeah. And, refresh these things and make sure that we're fulfilling all our duties as required.
Sure, I remember us doing that some time ago and having all the lists that everybody's involved in. I'd be happy to bring that back at your next commission meeting.
And we may have people appointed to these things who are no longer on the commission, so it may be time to take another look.
Sure. Be happy to do that.
Okay, looks like we're in time for item 1, the subdivision modification and variance for Carnelian Heights. Lisa.
Good morning to you all. Just as before I start the timed item, I just wanted to add a little bit of clarification to what Mr. Thompson said about the coaster ride, in that it's not what people would think of as a traditional roller coaster. It doesn't have the loops, and it's not raised up way in the air and comes down. It's more of a bobsled type ride that's lower to the ground, and it does have, it comes down the mountain. They'll be pulled up. The proposal is they would be pulled up, and it's an individual car or sled for each person, unless you have a small child, and then they would go in front of you. And then you're pulled up, and then it's gravity down, and there's a maximum speed that's allowed, and with that, the person can use a handbrake to go as slow as they want. Yes. And then they come down, and it's got a series of terrain going around, but it's lower to the ground. It's not your, 200 feet in the air.
All over Europe, and some of them in Utah I've seen recently.
Right, and in Canada also. Yeah. Okay. With that, I am not the planner for this subdivision modification and variance, but I am presenting it for Alan Bruce from Tahoe. So this is a request today is from Todd and Brianne Hipsley, who are here today for a subdivision modification of the Carnelian Heights Unit 2 subdivision and a variance to allow 12-foot setback where 20-foot is required in order to construct a 2-car garage with a covered entryway and a living area above. And the living area above the garage would be outside of that, the 20-foot setback area. This is kind of hard to see, but this I guess I am. As you can see, it's a single-family residential parcel, approximately about 2.24 acres, and it's surrounded by similar parcels. It is within the Carnelian Heights subdivision, and the current zoning is 014. It's a plan area statement 014 in the Cedar Flat residential. This is a property exhibit showing the proposed garage area that would be within that front setback. There's some site elevations showing the garage, the proposed living area, and this would be the front view. This is how the existing residential structure looks, and so the garage would come out from that, and then the second story would be back here. And with that, staff recommends that the Planning Commission approve the subdivision modification and variance to allow for the 12-foot front setback measured from the property line in order to permit the construction of the 2-car garage. And I can answer any questions that you may have, and the applicants are also here.
I don't know if I have a question per se, but then you wouldn't have enough room in front of the garage to park a car then. Is that correct?
There's actually 20 feet, and that's one of the requirements, one of the conditions of approval, is that they have to have 20 feet, and I'll let engineering and surveying speak to that more. So there is an easement for snow removal, and so that they can get a car safely off of the roadway.
So the variance is for 12 feet to the right-of-way line, but they are proposing 20 feet from the edge of pavement, which is required. So it was not a concern for engineering and surveying.
Thank you.
I'm just kind of questioning, I guess, the 20 feet. I guess that's the standard in Tahoe, is that 20 feet from the pavement?
No.
Correct.
You have a 19-foot pickup truck.
It's 20 feet from the property line,
From the property line.
and the street's
From-
usually another 10 feet past that usually.
Well, in this case, the variance is for,
The variance is
is going to go
for,
into the setback.
right, the variance is from the property line, but I think we'll let
Johnson.
engineering and surveying.
So it is, we require 20 feet to the edge of pavement, and that's because of the snow stakes, and it's for snow removal operations. So in other words, if a visitor's, as you're saying, a truck is parked in the driveway, if you were wanting 15 feet from the garage, then you'd be hanging out, and then the county would be entertaining claims for damage during snow removal. So that's the concern.
Okay.
But
And
we're
it sounds
okay
like
here.
engineering is okay with what we have proposed. here.
Yes, sir.
And the garage is, how was that a 20-foot in the garage too?
No, 20 feet, not included, so.
No, I'm just asking what the
The
distance.
garage is 12 feet from the right-of-way line, but the edge of pavement is 20 feet from the face of garage. So they're two different lines.
Okay, and so how much room is in the garage is there for a car to park in there?
Oh,
In the garage,
Yeah,
it's a two-car garage.
two-car? What's the distance from front to back?
It's, it's about a 457, I believe, square foot garage. The distance from front to back,
It looks like about 21
Twen-
feet, 22 feet. It
Yeah.
looks like if you go to page 9 of your packet, the floor plan looks like it's about 22 feet.
yeah.
It says 21 feet, 11 inches.
And the living space above is not in this.
Correct. It's outside. Just the garage,
yeah.
correct. Because it's partially over the existing residential and then partially over the garage.
Any other questions?
Tell me about the topography. That's one of the findings that you're recommending we make, that the variance is justified because of the sloping topography. We run into this all the time up there where they have relatively steep lots and the like. You haven't said anything about this one. How sloping is it?
It's, I haven't actually been up there since it's not my project, but in talking with Alan, and you can see from the proposal here, is that it slopes down, and it also, in speaking with Alan, because of the TRPA requirements of the coverage, that because this area here is already impacted with the driveway, that this was approved by TRPA because it's not going to cause any impact. If they were to go off of this side, it would cause new impact, whereas coming off the driveway area, they view that as not an additional impact.
Any other questions? Thank you. Would the applicant like to come up and add anything?
No, we don't have anything to add. And there were some conditions put on it that we understand, so we're good with everything.
Okay, any questions for the, all right, thank you. Back to the first team.
Thanks.
Anybody from the public would like to comment or? All right, seeing none, we'll come back to the commissioners.
Well, I would make a motion that we approve the subdivision modification and variance to allow for the 12-foot front setback and with the CEQA findings and all the attached conditions of approval.
Second.
A motion and a second. All in favor?
Let's clarify first.
I get,
You were talking about the CEQA findings, Ken. Did you intend to include all of the findings that were recommended in our staff
Yeah.
report, including those for the variance as well?
Uh-huh.
Okay, I thought so. Okay.
variance and subdivision modification
Yeah.
findings.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries. All right, and we are past 10:15, so we have the conditional use permit for the NIAC Temporary Construction Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, Commissioners. You'll notice the title of this is NIAC Temporary Construction Office. You've heard a few proposals up in that area for temporary concrete batch plant, temporary aggregate crushing operation. This sort of signifies the winding down of everything up there. It is once again a temporary, yeah, for the time being. I think who knows when it's going to ramp up again. So this would be, there's an existing modular unit on the site now that's been serving as an office space for the operations up there. The proposal is to allow this to be a continued temporary use. This is a new use permit request specific for that particular use there. It would serve as a command center for the completion of the I-80 reconstruction project. Just so you're all aware, the roadway construction will be completed by this fall. That means all the K-rail is going to be removed and all the lanes of traffic are going to be open. So those of you who travel frequently, Nikki, Ken, be happy to hear that. The temporary office will be in place until next summer and fall. It'll be used for the remainder of this season to kind of wrap up the site operations there. They'll come back in the spring and use it to kind of take care of some of the last-minute improvements on the highway, I guess some drain inlets and kind of cleaning up some of the other sites. Upon removal, just as with the batch plant, the site will be cleared and stabilized. So previously, you heard permit requests for the concrete batch plant up here. That's not on Maui like on Easter Island. That's just a Google image that kind of stayed there for some reason. That's actually right where the cell tower is. So this is the concrete batch plant, the mixing operations, the mixer over here. This site will all be all the construction up there will be removed. It's going to be buttoned up. It'll be winterized over the winter, and then next spring they'll come in and restore the site. That'll be the same for down here where the materials, the aggregate materials is being stored, and also for this site where we have parking mostly and outdoor storage. So the project site really is now no longer the entire parcel, but this area in red here. This is a kind of a detailed image of it here. We've got the modular office units and parking and associated storage up in the north end of the site. It's about a 1 acre parcel, or 1 acre portion of the parcel, excuse me. A little temperamental today. So what is up there today is the modular office unit here, covered by a rather impressive snow storage, snow shed, I guess is what you'd call it. Building permits will be issued for those. That's one of the conditions of approval. Those will be removed, like I said, by summer or fall. Another condition of approval on the site will be restored, as well as the roadways up there on Nyack Road. Heavy truck operations can impact the road up there. So we'll have security deposits in place for those removals and restoration when the site's completed. So, well, based on the conditions of approval and the findings we have in the staff report, staff is recommending approval of this temporary use permit. I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
You have one question concerning the storage. What's actually being stored?
That is a pretty good question. I'll maybe have the applicant answer that. Right now, I don't know what they're planning on keeping stored there. Right now, it's, I think, additional K-rail. I don't know if it's aggregate. I don't think it's aggregate on the site.
I was just wondering, for example, would it be heavy equipment that could be hydraulic? Do we have any, impervious barriers around it, or is there something like that required?
I apologize. I don't know the answer to that, but the applicant can probably answer that for you.
Any other questions? Thank you,
Okay.
Gary. Would the applicant like to come up and answer that question?
Yeah, I'm Nathan with Tiger Construction, and what would be on site is what's, if I can go back here. Those boxes in red would be Connex boxes or C-trains, and we'd be storing just a matter of small equipment inside of them, but we don't intend to have any large grading equipment or anything up there on that site, just vehicles parking there.
Any other questions? Thank you. Is there anybody from the public who would like to speak about this? And seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commissioners.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we approve the conditional use permit, subject to the findings and recommended conditions of approval that are contained in our staff report.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, now we can take 5 minutes because we're early. Nobody objects.
Can you tell? Oh, it's on. I'm Crystal Jacobson with the Placer County Planning Services Division, and I'm here today to present a zoning text amendment proposal for and a negative declaration for a single-room occupancy residential housing unit. This is part of our housing element implementation. So just to give you some background really quick, this ZTA is a result of state housing law. It was Senate Bill 2 that was passed, Chapter 233. Generally, this Senate bill amended housing law regarding planning and approval, local planning and approval for single-room occupancy housing units. SB 2 requires that at least one zone district in a local jurisdiction must be identified to permit single-room occupancy units without a use permit or other discretionary action. And in just a minute here, I'll talk about what single-room occupancy units are. So I'll define them here in a second. It also requires that SRO buildings can only be subject to the development and management standards that apply to residential or commercial uses within the same zone district. So basically, they need to be treated as a residential use. And then finally, it allows for written and objective standards to be applied, including the maximum number of beds, unit sizes, provisions for on-site management, length of stay, and security of the units. So again, this is a housing element implementation zoning text amendment. So our housing element was adopted in 2009, and in that element, in the housing element, it identified this single-room occupancy as a program. So it was program G4. And that program notes that the county shall amend our zoning code to define these units. They're not defined currently in our ordinance. And then explicitly allow them as a residential use in certain zones. And so as a part of this process, the housing element process, the zone districts that were identified to explore for this use were the multifamily residential zone, a highway service zone, and the resort zone districts. So under our current definitions, we do not define these types of housing units. We do define hotels and motels, which are more transient in nature. So those would be 30 days or less for a length of stay. And then we also, of course, define dwelling or a dwelling unit, which is more of a residential, your typical single-family residence, or multifamily residence where you have either a bathroom or a kitchen facility within the unit. So that brings me to the proposed definition. And it says up here hotels, it's actually housing, so I apologize for that. But it means, in this code, I should point out that this definition comes straight out of the housing law. Single-room occupancy residential housing means any building containing 5 or more guest rooms or units intended or designed to be used, or which are used, rented, or hired out to be occupied, or which are occupied for sleeping purposes by residents, which is also the primary residence of those residents. So it is the intent here, again, I know it's kind of interesting language, but the intent is that they should be residential units. So they're not transient units. It's unlike a hotel or motel use. So furthermore, the individual unit shall lack either cooking facilities or individual sanitary facilities or both. However, for the purposes of this definition, and this is the part that the county has added, single-room occupancy residential hotel housing does not include residential care homes, senior housing projects, rooming and boarding houses, hotels and motels, bed and breakfast lodging, and extended care facilities or hospitals. So these units here are already defined in our ordinance, and so they have their own definition, they're their own use. So it's not to be confused for any of those.
Crystal?
Yes.
I apologize for breaking in, but I have a question that I think needs to be asked here. What's the difference between these SROs and a rooming or a boarding house? Well, describe to me what I'm going to see when I approach these things.
Well, I'll talk a little bit more, and I actually have some floor plans that show you what they'll look like. But really, the main difference is the size of the units and the bathroom and kitchen facilities. And so I'll talk about that here in just a minute. So SRO units can lack one of those facilities. So that's really the difference. A boarding house, you would have those types of facilities either in a unit. There's no mandate for whether or not you can have those units. with SROs, the idea here is for this definition is that you don't have to. It's allowing these units to be residential in nature and to be lacking one of those, either a bathroom or a kitchen. So I'll talk about it's further defined here in just a minute. So can I?
One more quick question.
Yes.
Individual units shall lack either cooking facilities or individual sanitary facilities or both. Does that mean that they cannot have both, or would it still be possible for?
No, they can have both, or they cannot. So you could do either.
So it should be may lack, not shall?
Shall. I'm looking to Chris because he's the one that helped draft.
Did you say you
the
took
code.
this definition out of the government code someplace?
Well, the this part is, oops, excuse me. This part right up here is definitely out of the code. Chris, can you? The may versus shall right here. Is that part out of the code? I know this is the county's section, but the may versus shall?
It should be may. In the staff report, it says may.
May. Yeah, I believe that there's flexibility there, and that was the intent. So that word should be wrong in my is wrong in my presentation. The idea here is to allow for flexibility of a variety of housing types, and the purpose really is to, it's the state's their position with regard to housing laws to try to have local jurisdictions provide for all different kinds of housing types, specifically related to affordability. So that's really where this SRO definition is coming from. So with respect to the permitting zoning districts and what we are proposing, again, based upon the housing element and that program G4, we identified 3 districts. One was residential multifamily, the other is highway service, and finally the resort zone district. And so we took a look at all 3 of those districts, and we tried to select one or propose one that really met the spirit and intent of the state housing law. And because these are, and again, here it says hotel, in the code, in the attached code that you have in your staff report, it's actually housing units. The intent is to identify these units as residential uses. And so it was our perspective that the most appropriate zone district to allow by right would be, allow this use by right, would be residential multifamily, because that's where residential uses are. Whereas highway service and resort, you typically see your hotels and motels. So this is the proposal of our department. We felt that it met the, again, the spirit and intent of the state housing law. So we're proposing these units to be 30 or fewer allowed by right within the residential multifamily zoning district with some development standards, which I'll get to in a minute. And then 30 or more units with the approval of a minor use permit. So there would be some discretionary review on that. And then within the highway service and resort, for both of those, 30 or fewer or 30 or more to be allowed with the approval of a use permit. So with respect to development standards, as I noted, the state code does allow us to develop some standards for these units. And so these are some standards. I have another slide here that shows some other standards, but basically we have proposed that the unit shall have a minimum size of 150 square feet and a maximum size of 400 square feet. Each unit shall accommodate a maximum of 2 people. Laundry facilities must be provided in the units, and then the units would be limited to 30 or more days. The idea here is that they're not transient. 30 is your typical time frame for a lease based on state code. And then an existing structure may be converted to an SRO facility. So what this means is, presuming that the units would meet these other standards here, and it was a like an old hotel, and they wanted to convert it to an SRO, that would be a potential.
Did you made this up?
Did I make that up?
The standards that was created by staff, not necessarily you.
Not me personally, but we, our team reviewed other codes, other local jurisdiction codes. So we, this came into effect SB 2, and then people started, or local jurisdictions started amending their housing element And so when they started updating their codes, what we did is took a look at those codes and kind of pulled from different ones and tried to kind of gauge what kind of standards to use. Yeah.
How did you decide that laundry was an issue? I mean, I looked at that and I'm wondering, why would I care?
If you go out to a laundromat, I mean, why does it have to be provided?
Yeah, I mean, there must be some logic here that I'm missing. What is it?
Chris is our, he helped write the code, so I'm going to point to Chris.
Let Chris Schmidt with the planning department. Let's go back to boarding house briefly. The difference is boarding house are bedrooms that are rented individually, and a meal is served. So at least one meal per day by, I guess, the owner, the residence.
That's the code definition of
That's
a
the
boarding
code
house?
definition. So that's different than our SROs where the owner operator is not providing a meal.
So structurally, they could be identical. It's just if I don't feed you, it's an SRO. If I do, it's a boarding house, and I can put it in a different zone.
Sure.
Okay, so how does that answer the laundry question?
Laundry is a state requirement.
Oh, is it in the
It's one of
code
those
somewhere,
standards,
in the
yeah.
state code? Oh,
It's talked about in the code.
well then, we will follow it.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, so then we get to that has to do with the bathroom and the kitchen portions of the facility that I talked about earlier. So again, further standards. An SRO unit may contain partial or full bathroom facilities. If a full bathroom facility is not provided, common bathroom facilities shall be provided at least one full bathroom per floor.
I do have one question on that. What if it's like a converted old motel that's a 2 or 3 story one and they have, 30 units per floor? So it's one bathroom for.
Well, I would think that in typical hotels.
They didn't have it inside, if they didn't have the bathroom. I can see with the kitchen, it doesn't really matter how many, but.
Right, it would need to be, they'd need to have one per floor, and I would think with the old motel and hotels, you probably wouldn't have that problem. I would think the units themselves would each have a bathroom facility, but in that situation, probably what they would need to do would be to modify that floor to allow for a kitchen in addition to the units being contained within, or the bathrooms being contained within each unit.
But if they converted something that didn't have bathrooms in each room.
They can do that, presuming that they provide for one common bathroom facility on that floor.
Well, my question is.
How big is the floor?
Is there a maximum occupancy per floor? Like, in other words, is it 20 people or 40 people share the one bathroom?
I don't believe that there's any standards to that. There's standards set for, it needs to be 5 units or more would be considered an SRO. But I don't believe that there are any standards related to how many people can share a bathroom. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, that's my question. If you have a floor and you have 20 units on the floor and one bathroom, and say there's 40 people or 35 people there using the one bathroom, I mean, is there just a number of people for?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I don't think that that's in the code, but it's certainly something. Again, we can apply standards that we feel are reasonable. If there's a desire of your commission to go back and explore that further with perhaps our environmental health department. We did run this through, all the different departments. That particular issue didn't come up. It is a good question.
Is there not codes in place already that dictate, based on an occupancy, what kind of facilities are needed to be to?
It's probably a building code issue. I don't have the numbers. The state just says you have to have one bathroom if you don't have them in your individual rooms per floor.
But that doesn't necessarily mean one like residential bathroom. That's a bathroom facility, so to speak, could have multiple.
Right, and we'll have discretion if there's more than 30 beds or 30 units too, because that'll be a use permit. So then we'll get into more detail about conditioning. But I believe the size of the bathroom or the size of the kitchen, probably in the building code, I would imagine.
Yeah, I was looking just in your staff report on page 9 of the packet. It looks like the common bathroom facilities shall be provided in accordance with the California Building Code for congregate residences with at least one full bathroom per floor. So I would imagine that in the California Building Code, there are some regulation requirements regarding those facilities.
Yeah, these units would need to, I mean, even if no discretionary action is required, say they have 30 units and they come in, they still need to go through the building permit process and the environmental health process. I'm just not familiar with, like Paul said, whether or not that the number of folks that could use one bathroom is included in their codes. So then, in addition, the second
Crystal,
one.
excuse me.
I'm sorry.
Poor girl, you're not going to be able to get this thing finished. I'm really stuck on the difference between what we're talking about here and a boarding house. What zoning districts are boarding houses allowed in now?
Hold on, I'm going to grab Chris's code here.
And while Chris is doing that, let's say that one of the universities down in Rockland decides they want to build a dorm next door. Is that an SRO? Is that a boarding house? What is it?
City of Rockland.
Oh, let's put it in the county. Yeah, it's a City of Rockland problem.
So a boarding house is consistent with the multifamily district or zone use, excuse me, and it's allowed in residential multifamily with a use permit, commercial, general commercial, so C1, C2 with use permits, planned commercial development with a use permit, highway service, and resort, all with use permits. So nothing by right.
So why are we handling this any different if we're really down arguing about square footage and whether it has a bathroom or not, or whether it has a hot plate? Shouldn't these kind of all be under the same umbrella, whether they're a boarding house, whether they're a single residence occupancy? I just don't see any distinction here.
Because it's required by state law.
Well, the state law doesn't require that we handle it separately. It requires that we accommodate it. And we can do that through enlarging our boarding house definition, can't we?
It requires that we define it separately. It needs to be its own use.
Well, then why wouldn't it be? Okay, I can play that game. I can define it as a use, and the uses are identical to what we do with boarding houses. Why would they be treated any different?
Because if a unit has a kitchen and or a bath, then by definition it's not a boarding house. Boarding house is basically a bedroom that you rent. These could have a kitchen and or bath facility, or may not. And we can do just multiple units. A boarding house is limited by the size of your house. It could be 4 bedrooms, you're renting out 4 rooms. Here you can do 30. I know we have some.
Is there a code definition limiting a boarding house to 30 units? Or is that just typically what you see as a practical matter?
I think it's just typically what you see as a practical matter.
Yeah, I'm really having a hard time separating out these two uses. I can play the code game and define them, but they ought to be essentially equal. I'm not getting there. And you remember the other law, that of unintended consequences? Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't we allow an SRO in highway commercial?
We could allow SRO and highway commercial.
But you didn't recommend that. It seemed to me.
Well, we didn't, again, because when we looked at this type of use and how it functions, it's supposed to be residential in nature, and so it was our perspective that putting it in residential multifamily by right met the spirit and intent of the state housing law. But this is just a proposal to your commission, and we're more than happy to entertain any or to go back and further explore a different district.
You've been living with it for a long time. I've been living with it for a week, and I'm just trying to understand what your logic was, because you kind of are the pros
right.
over on this issue.
And let me finish up, and I'll talk about, because we did take this to the max, and that comment came up at the max, so I definitely want to address that further. So finally, the last standard here is that an SRO unit may contain partial or full kitchen facilities. A full kitchen includes a sink, a refrigerator, stove, range top, or oven. A partial kitchen is missing at least one of those appliances. If a full kitchen is not provided, common kitchen facility shall be provided, again, at least one full kitchen per floor. So it allows, for some flexibility with regard to the kitchen design within the units. Here's some examples of floor plans. So here you've got, 2 very small bedrooms, a shared bath, and then presumably, just 2 sinks here. This one here is 1 bedroom. Right here, you might have like a hot plate and a refrigerator type thing. Again, closet space and a bathroom, so this would be 1 unit. And then here's a larger unit, maybe the 400 square foot range, where you'd have your 2 bedrooms, you're missing a kitchen facility, you have a shared bath, a shared living, and then maybe, here again, you might have, a refrigerator and a sink, or a refrigerator and a hot plate, something of that nature. So it's very similar, I think, personally, to a dormitory type use. So what I wanted to point out is that this did go, and I think in your packet you have you have a summary of the MAC. So we did take this to all of the municipal advisory councils within the county, and we got a number of comments. And one of the comments that was received, and I believe there's actually a comment letter that's attached in your correspondence too, had to do with the zone district that we selected, in that whether they were commenting on whether or not residential multifamily is the most appropriate zone district for this. So again, I just want to say that that is the proposal that we brought forward. There were 3 to choose from based upon the program G4 that was adopted by our board as part of our housing element. So we could look at highway service, resort, and residential multifamily. We need to pick one of those where it would be allowed by right, up to 30 units. So this is our proposal to you, but we're certainly, take any direction that you can give us today. So with that, we recommend that your Planning Commission forward a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to approve the proposed zoning text amendment and to adopt the negative declaration prepared for the amendment and as contained in your report, your staff report package. So I'm happy to answer any more questions or just take some direction from
I guess now
your commission.
I'm a little bit confused because I guess I've heard these things called barracks and dorms. And so if this is in a residential district, mixed use, or a dense use, I guess, residential multifamily, it's going to be an SRO. But if it's anywhere else that somebody's proposing, it's going to be a boarding house?
Well, they wouldn't. Boarding houses are allowed in more districts than what this would be allowed in. So
yeah, that's what I'm saying. So it's just what.
Yeah, except they function a little bit differently.
If somebody wants to propose this, they just have to change the name, right?
Cook a meal.
They could by right, or not by right, but with the approval of a use permit, have boarding houses in other districts within our jurisdiction.
It would just be the process they go through. It would be a use permit or else.
Correct.
By right process is really the only difference.
The big difference here is that with an SRO unit, it's allowing it by right. The boarding houses, there isn't one district where it's allowed by right. It's always allowed with the approval of a use permit. So that's, and I can go back to that table. That's, I think, one of the biggest differences with an SRO. Well, certainly the type of housing is different, but with respect to these uses being allowed by right, that is a big difference between this and a boarding house, is that this state law is requiring that up to 30 with a single room occupancy, it's allowed by right, so they could come in for a building permit, basically. Whereas with boarding houses, you don't see, when you're looking at the same table for the residential multifamily, where boarding houses are allowed, you cannot, it's all MUP or CUP here.
Right. Okay, so it's a requirement for a use permit is a difference.
Right, it's sort of allowing for sort of a less restrictive of a process to get through, so eliminating the discretionary review.
Well, didn't we just hear that the difference between it is also that a meal has to be served?
Yeah, there's, like I said, there's some difference between.
The minor use permit, it's not the same thing, right? If you're going to be
They're
serving a meal.
different.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, they're different uses, but with respect, like if, with what you were noting about the difference in if somebody wants to build it in another area of the county, it would be required, a boarding house, it would be required with a use permit. And it does function a little bit different.
So, yeah, the meal getting served, I guess I'm confused there, but, I'm familiar with barracks is where you have a lot of rooms and common bathroom area, and then you have a common kitchen area. And would that be only allowed as an SRO, or would that be considered a boarding house too?
I don't know that we define barracks. No, we don't.
I think you're calling it.
But a boarding house.
I'm asking if you're calling it a boarding house, a barracks.
I've never been in a barracks, so I don't know that I can tell you that, but.
It's like a
Describe it
dorm.
for you. It's
Uh-huh.
individual bedrooms.
Right. A dormitory would be similar to a boarding house, I would think. Uh-huh.
Okay, so the meal being served, I don't understand that part. What's that mean? And where do you have to require that?
Board, room and board.
Yeah,
That's what board means.
in the boarding house definition, it just says a meal is served. The other, I think another distinction is the SROs as someone's permanent residence. And I think in a boarding house, it can be real short-term occupancy, a week, 2, 3 weeks. SRO cutoff is 30 days or more, so there's that distinction too.
Let me make.
So I
a
guess what I'm
suggestion.
kind of struggling with is in, like a rooming house, I don't know, I mean, the part about the meal part, how you enforce that or what that means. And if somebody wants to just have a single rooms, common bathrooms, and it's a semi or permanent residence for people with a common kitchen where they can go cook their meals. And so if somebody wants to do that, is the only place they can do that is in these districts?
For this type of use, yeah, and I think what's unique about this too is the size of the unit. Going down to 150 square feet is different than your typical residential dwelling unit.
Well, the rooms could be 150 square feet, right?
To 400, there's a range.
Right, and so that describes a barracks to me, or I don't know what, but
Yeah, very similar, I would think, to a dormitory. Yes.
Dormitory, yeah.
Yeah.
And so the only place the dormitory or SRO, I mean, this type of thing can be built in the county now is in a residential area.
The boarding houses are allowed within the district's commercial, residential, multifamily, highway service, and resort. So actually more districts than this. So again, the key difference here is that discretionary action. I'm sorry?
You could have a barracks in an agricultural district too.
No, not based on our code, no.
Yeah.
Let me
We do
suggest-
have another item on the agenda, though.
Yeah,
That is,
I'm a little bit confused.
related to that.
Let me, if I could, let me read to you the definition out of the zoning code for the boarding house. That might help a little here. Boarding house, single dwellings where bedrooms are rented to 5 or more people and at least one common meal is offered each day. The boarding of 4 or fewer renters is not considered to be a land use different from the single-family dwelling. What we have here is something that, under the housing laws of the state, the goal is to provide as a variety of different affordable housing types. And this is how this generated out with the SRO. You will typically see this in the larger cities such as San Francisco, some in Sacramento, where there are the conversions of the hotels to a single to the single room occupancy, where it was a hotel, but now it's being transitioned over. So the idea was that this is yet another type of affordable housing that could be provided. The distinction, I think, between the boarding house is, one, the SRO does not require a meal to be served. 2, there is a requirement as to bathroom facilities versus just a room in a house. As Crystal was saying, though, what zone district we allow it by right. We are required under state law to provide it as of right in one zone. And the intent of that is the state looks at use permit requirements to be a restriction to allowing affordable housing uses to be established. So the intent is, and you'll see this in the item coming up, the intent is to find a zone district that makes the most sense from a planning perspective, considering the type of use, where it can be allowed as of right. And that's what's being proposed here. I don't know if that helps or hurts, but
I think it does. I think maybe I'm outside the bounds of what this is about. I'm thinking about maybe other zoning text that might permit what I was thinking in my mind that's not covered under this particular area.
right, the requirements of our housing element in the implementation programs, which you're seeing now and you will continue to see, is keeping that goal in mind, that the idea is to remove the boundaries to establishing the affordable housing, but still having the ability, as we have here, for a certain amount of reasonable development standards to ensure that it is consistent with the other surrounding uses. So it is a different type of zoning text amendment that you're saying.
Okay.
Is there deed restrictions, or what keeps this affordable by definition once it's built?
There's no requirement for a deed restriction on the units. I think just the size and type of unit would, limit its
Right.
affordability.
There's we probably don't have enough time to go through all the deed restrictions, which you typically will see in your multifamily affordable housing developments. There will be deed restrictions to keep the rent at a certain level. Crystal's right. With this particular type of use, and I think that's why you see it being fairly popular in the larger cities, is it's the ability to provide something by virtue of its size at an affordable rate to people. So there is no requirement for a deed restriction. It's just, it's going to be limited in terms of how much you can charge for a 150 square foot room.
Well, I understand that, but I also, if we're meeting an affordable housing requirement, and this is how this is coming in the door, then there ought to be something in place to make sure that it is maintained as affordable housing, it just seems to me.
The state will probably be telling you what to do as soon as it's like
Does SB2 actually require or call out SROs?
Yes, it calls it out.
It calls them out specifically as SROs?
Yes.
Okay.
What I see forthcoming, if we adopt something like this, is somebody sitting down in front of your desk and saying, Crystal, I want to develop something. And we've seen some question here of exactly what the definition is by the questions that were asked by the commissioners. And you conclude by looking at the code, well, that's an SRO, therefore you're allowed here and here. No. It's really a boarding house, and therefore I'm allowed somewhere else. And so we get into these big discussions and arguments between staff and the applicants over trying to define what's an SRO and what's a boarding house. And I think where I'm headed with this is it shouldn't make any difference. I see the two uses as being so coexistent as to be virtually the same. But I'm told by the state of California that I must accommodate one use differently. So I'll adopt the California definition for whatever use that may be. And I'll make the applicable districts identical to boarding houses. The fact of the matter is I think of these things, Crystal, and I can't help it, but I watch these movies and I think of flop houses and boarding houses and things. I'm not sure I want those in multifamily residential areas as a matter of right. I would more see those as downtown somewhere in the commercial districts or highway service or something. That can be debated later, but right now I'm seeing the distinction between an SRO and a boarding house as being virtually non-existent. And why we have to make it because of state law, but we don't have to treat it that much different. We will designate one area, at least one, as a matter of right. Then we can line up all the rest of them so that the applicant who comes in and sitting in front of you and is arguing with you, whether it's a boarding house or an SRO, it really doesn't make any difference. Except for this one area where you can put it in as a matter of right, it's an MUP. And the fact that Rich was confused about the definition, minor, all of us sitting here, well, what if it has this, what if it has that? I really think if we do this right, it won't make any difference.
You want to repeat that?
You're being logical here, and it just takes a while to digest.
The bottom line to this is I think it needs to go back for some more discussion. There's another law here that hasn't been discussed, and that's the law of unintended consequences. You know, that always raises its ugly little head at some point in the future. And I'm just trying to cut that in the bud. My recommendation would be to go back to combine this as much as you can with the boarding house. We will salute the state, and we will designate one area as buildable as a matter of right. We're required to do it, so we will. When that discussion comes up, I'll be arguing for commercial or highway service. I will not be arguing for RM.
Could I ask for point of clarification, though, Commissioner Brenhall? Are you looking for staff to go back to decide whether another zone district with the current definition of SRO be considered, or whether SRO would be combined with boarding house and still keep it in the multifamily?
Can you combine boarding house and SRO and meet the state law?
We'd have to look at changing, and I think that is a bigger task, would be changing the zoning code regarding boarding houses, because right now we have a definition of boarding houses that's established and zone districts where that's permitted with a use permit. If we're trying to meld it, it seems to me that's quite a change of the boarding house definition, because again, we have the SRO definition set by state law. I mean, our basic definition is there. So we would be taking another use in our zoning code and, in my opinion, radically changing it to make it fit within the SRO. And I don't know if the commission wants to go that far.
I don't think we need to go that far. What I'm seeing is definite definitions that are parallel, and you as an applicant, okay, a theoretical applicant. It doesn't make any difference whether you have a kitchen, whether you have a bathroom, whether you have a hot plate, whether you serve meals, you don't serve meals, because whichever one of these two pipelines you fall into, when you get to the bottom of them, you come out the same place. I don't want there to be an inherent advantage to being called an SRO over a boarding house. And I guess, having said that, there's automatically going to be one because you're allowed to build by right in some places. Great, let's make that place someplace that's logical, not necessarily among the RM families. That's kind of where I'm headed on this.
You know, Jerry, my fuzzy memory says that we talked about where these would be when we looked at the housing element. Was it in 2009?
Yes.
Were we talking about these, or were we talking about these halfway houses that we've had to deal with?
Well, we were talking about the units being in the residential high density areas, yeah.
And if we're going to try to follow the state's mandate for affordable housing is generally considered in commercial, it's generally in residential.
I'm looking at the use.
And I'm
intense boarding houses, the barracks, the dorms. You know, if we're going to have those, where do we want them?
Well, let's face it, it is housing. These people are there for over 30 days. The state's trying to break down the barriers for affordable housing.
Yeah, but the use is actually more in line with motels, hotels, and stuff like that.
That have probably been converted.
Over 30 days you're staying there.
I'm not saying the length of stay, but the size of the units and
the
where those
intensity
other
of the
things
use is more
are placed.
consistent with
They're
that.
placed in more commercial areas than residential.
Right, and they're trying to break that schism between those two places and make this more like where people live rather than where people come in and just stay a few days and leave.
And we're not prohibiting that, Minor. Vicki, we're saying, okay, if you want it in one of these other areas, come in for an MUP. But as a matter of right, you can build it, select the zone of your choice here.
We can't have an MUP in this. We got to have one by right. So
One-
we
Yeah.
pick the spot, and so it's going to be a vote on where we want to put it, right? Basically, if we assume the definition given to us by the state, that's where our main choice is, where we're going to stick it. Okay.
Stick it. That's an interesting concept.
I think to clarify too, under your housing element, 3 particular districts were identified. And I think what Crystal is saying is that if it's the commission's direction that perhaps it not be the multifamily as of right, the commission has the latitude to decide that one of the other 2 districts might be more appropriate. And that might, in fact, distinguish it from a boarding house. And it's not to say a boarding house isn't affordable. but we have layers of affordability under the state law for affordable housing. It becomes a little convoluted because clearly a boarding house is probably less expensive than an apartment.
There's no place now, though, with current zoning by right where somebody could come in and build just 30 residential units, correct?
Correct.
Even in a multifamily zone, you can't walk in and say it's zoned and I'm building 30 units because I can.
Correct.
Correct.
So now we're looking at granting this right above and beyond what any other zoning allows to a particular zone.
Correct.
Jeff, you're a real estate man, and you know the market as well and probably better than anybody on this commission. What, in your opinion, is the more likely scenario, that A, somebody will come in and build a boarding house or an SRO from the ground up, or B, convert an old motel someplace?
You know, I think that the quick look and quick glance is going to be at existing structures and conversions, and I think from what I've seen elsewhere, that's mostly what's been done also. I think Sacramento just opened one up last week.
And so what zones are these hotels and motels in? Those are the ones where I would say you can do it as a matter of right.
And I mean, I think the one in Sacramento is down in a commercial district. It's all downtown.
Yeah.
And, you know, like I say, I would think that, you know, at a glance, I'm leaning towards what you're thinking, that it belongs more in a commercially zoned district than in a single family or multifamily, which is 15 units or less typically. 20. What's our multifamily zone? 20. So we're upping that by 50% without any chance at a review of the project more than just a building permit or what have you. That might be a lot to stuff in around, especially this isn't family-oriented housing. Obviously, this isn't where kids are going to go unless it's single parents kind of thing, but with 2 people per unit, this isn't what you would call, you know, family housing, and you're going to go put it right next to family housing if you put it in a multi-family zone. So I'm, you know, at a glance, I think I'm leaning towards what you're saying, that it probably should be leaning more towards the commercial or the highway service side to go in by right, and then things can be reviewed more carefully if it's going anywhere
And then
else.
MUPs in all the same areas that boarding houses are allowed otherwise. Yeah, that's kind of where. Pardon?
With an MUP, other words?
Yes. Yeah. Only one area by right, and it's not RM. It's C1 or C2 or wherever the motels and hotels are, Crystal.
The other 2 districts that were identified in our housing element were highway service and RES, which is resort.
Yeah, let's put those up at North Star. So,
I think staff agrees with Commissioner Moss that we're probably not going to see these built from the ground up. It's most likely going to be a conversion. So that's why we have the highway service and resort districts as here's where you find your typical 1 or 2 story old motels that probably are out of favor with travelers and vacationers today. And we know that up in the basin, there's longer term tenants in a lot of these and are probably illegally occupied. So this is an option or a window for them to actually come in and get permitted so that we can have affordable housing up in the basin. And we also think that this, for the ground up, this might be an option for the resorts or others that have to provide workforce housing. They can have a dormitory type setting for their employees. Don't have big units with bathrooms and kitchens, but have the bathroom or the kitchen down the hall. Most of these new units would have bathrooms, kind of like what we did with Sawmill. They're small dormitory type units with kitchen and bathroom. This would be a little bit different, where they have the option of not having a complete unit, but providing a centralized facility on one of the floors. So we think it's an option for workforce housing up in the basin or at the resorts.
well, I don't want to leave it just hanging there, and this has gone on for quite a while. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to propose a motion.
All right.
And the motion would be that this matter be. Oh, we haven't. We have a. I'm sorry. I was putting the cart before the horse here. Thanks, Crystal.
Come on.
Wow, we want to hear it.
Okay, I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget things, okay. Okay, planning has proposed, of course, the 3, single, I'm
tell us
Muriel
your-
Davis from Penryn.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. I know all you guys. Single room occupancy in the 3 zoning areas when only one area is required by the state. And I can see allowing these units in the resort areas where the dorm-like units are necessary for housing the workers in places like our ski resorts. But I do not understand why planning would propose these units in the RM zoning areas, as you have discussed, which are located throughout the county and are very often next to single-family housing areas. These SRO units are not like motels or hotels or even apartments where each unit has a bathroom, and it's unnecessary to allow them in the RM zoning areas, and I'm hoping the Planning Commission would see the major impact that these units would have on their residents and their property values, and would remove the RM zoning completely from the SROs. I admit I do not understand the state requiring that counties allow these units at all, but the county council's explanation helps me understand. But why would our planning department propose allowing these in 3 zoning areas, which only one is required? And then, after talking with Chris, he's been very helpful, I didn't realize until today that the RM was going to be a right, which means that right means they can just go to the office and ask it and it's done. And that's even worse than what I thought. But to me, it should be in, like, I can see in the resorts and the housing services, they're close to shopping, so people, you know, if they're in those places, they might not have a car and they'll be close to transportation and stuff. So I'm hoping you would remove the RM completely from it, but then Mr. Brittenell had an idea of maybe clarifying it by at least having a use permit if you're going to have the RM, so they can't just come in and build it with nobody knowing anything about it. Thank you.
Ask, is there anybody else? But seeing none? Absolutely.
I forgot my glasses anyway. It's really upsetting because a lot of people don't know about these 2 zoning text amendments, and our newspapers don't think it's worthwhile that it would, that people should be aware of it, because I asked them to at least put an article about it in the paper. But just to let you know, this is a picture. Most of the districts have very little RMs, but Auburn has a lot of them, and that would be a big impact to the Auburn area for these SROs. And I'm afraid people might find out after the fact. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Brittenell.
Are you cutting off the public input at this point?
I think we're done, yes.
Okay, well, she just reinforced what I was about to say. My suggestion is that, and this is a motion, is that we send this back to staff for reconsideration of the districts, that it be blended to the extent possible with the requirements and limitations set forth on boarding houses, so there isn't that much of a difference, and that they come back with different recommended areas. I would recommend that RM be removed entirely, and that if we have to select one area as a matter of right, it be whichever C commercial area is consistent with motels and hotels, which is where we're more likely to see these things actually built than from the ground up in residential multifamily areas.
Seconded. Discussion? Just for discussion, I'd like to throw in there with the bathroom requirements where it's per floor, because I know we're talking about hotels and motels, but even in Sacramento, a lot of the conversions are taking place like in a warehouse area where they convert it over and make units, but really nice ones and stuff. But under this, I guess you could do sort of the same thing and make it an SRO the same way. So I don't know, just personally, you know, for health and sanitation and stuff, I think need to put some kind of a cap on number of units that can use one bathroom, whether it's 5 units, which is 10 people, or 10 units, which is 20 people. that you.
Or at least come back to us with some recommendation
some
in that regard.
recommendation.
Or if that's not already covered in the code, or tell us where it's covered.
Yeah,
in
if
the
it's
code.
in some state law, we need to know.
Yeah, so that way you don't end up with something where they're.
That's a good idea.
Going using the alleyway or whatever.
Good idea.
Okay, I'll second that.
We've got a motion with a modification, I guess?
And one last comment here. I just wanted to make sure that with the idea of trying to put the two together, boarding houses and SROs, that we don't change the boarding house at all to meet the state standards with the SRO, because they're the ones who are setting the definition. So I just didn't want to lose on one and the other.
My concern in raising that, Mickey, is, as I discussed with Karen, that I don't want somebody to come in to apply for building one of these things in a certain area as a matter of right, and we're getting into an argument of whether it's a boarding house or an SRO. To some extent, the use of one in an area ought to be coextensive with the use of the other. So state law says we have to define SROs and we have to give them some area as a matter of right. Okay, I'm saying take a look at the commercial zone. But all other areas should be at least coextensive with and no greater than boarding houses to the extent we can. Although I do agree with Chris on the resort area up there on highway service. Using that as the potential relief for workforce housing, especially in Tahoe, is a great idea.
Commissioner Britnall, if I may approach your commission. I just want to point out that in the housing element, the 3 districts that were identified do not include commercial. So it includes highway service, resort, or residential multifamily. So when you say commercial, do you maybe mean highway service or resort?
Where are motels and hotels
C1,
now?
C2, or C3?
In highway service or resort, either of those two.
Well, what about
But they're not considered commercial. Well, they're under the general broad definition of commercial, but they're not specifically a commercial district. So there are 3 that were identified: residential, multifamily, highway service, and resort.
Well, here's where I'm going, Crystal, and you're the pro in this stuff. You've got to help me out. As we discussed here, it's most likely that an old motel or an old hotel is going to be converted into one of these things. What's the zoning on those things?
Highway service or resort.
Okay, but then that's the answer.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, there's none in commercial that are allowed, aren't hotels, motels, et cetera, allowed in commercials, in one of the commercial zones?
They're allowed in C2 and C3 with a MUP, minor use permit.
Well, then MUP those areas when you come back with your recommendation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we want them to be able to convert these things. That's our bottom line.
We still have to pick one.
Yeah, and we have to pick one, so, but to lead RM. Okay, so my motion is pending.
We have a motion, and does the second still follow that motion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, now we're on the zoning text amendment for farm worker housing.
So just to confuse everything even more, here's another zoning text amendment.
Move we adjourn?
Now I think we're getting to that question.
This one also is designed to comply with the Employee Housing Act, which was updated back in 2006. It requires local jurisdictions to treat agricultural worker housing or farm worker housing as an agricultural use, and that's quite different than how we treated it before. The county now treats it as a residential use, so that needs to change according to the state. So farm worker housing, up to 36 beds in a group quarters, your bunk type housing, or 12 units or spaces designed for use by a single family or his family is considered an agricultural use according to state law. The county cannot require any permit, zoning variance, other zoning clearance that you require in that agricultural zone or any other agricultural activity in the same zone. So you treat it as an agricultural use, not residential use. This was also in our 2009 housing element. It was program F4. We promised the state we would be doing this. We just started updating our housing element this past month. The state's going to be asking us, have you implemented what you said you did? Are you complying with the laws we passed several years ago? So today, we do define farm labor housing. It's in section 1756-090. It's part of our caretaker and employee housing section. We say it's allowed in the farm district, the RA district, and AE zone districts. But the key here is today we require a minor use permit. That needs to go away. So we have a few new definitions. We have a farm worker dwelling units that's housing up to 6 employees or 1 farm employee in the worker's household. These are individual units. It can be any number of type of facility, a group living or a living quarters, a dwelling, a boarding house, bunkhouse, mobile home or manufactured home, RV, or travel trailer. In the forestry and TPZ zone districts, tents, RVs, or other mobile camping equipment for employees may be used for up to 90 days annually. And that was something we added after we went to the Agricultural Commission. Your complexes are your group quarters, up to 36 beds for families or households. Can be manufactured housing, again, factory-built housing or other forms of prefab housing, dormitory and barrack-style housing in which residents share common cooking and sanitary facilities. And these two definitions are very similar to what other jurisdictions are using throughout the state. We worked with the Agriculture Commissioner on defining what an agricultural farm employee is. There's a lot of concern, especially when we went to the max, that someone who goes to a winery and picks a handful of grapes, they want to stay overnight. Are they an agriculture? Are they a farm employee? The answer is no. You have to work full or part-time. It's 24 hours or more per week in any number of these, and here's how we define it, these type of operations. So these are legitimately farm workers. Here you'll see the MUPs where we required it previously. Our 2 new definitions, allowed use in 6 districts now, RA, RF, AE, F, forestry, and TPZ. So as of right. The state does allow us to set some development standards. One of them is minimum parcel size of 2.3 acres, and that was recently added. One of the concerns we heard at the max, we went to 10 different max with this and the SROs. A lot of concern that we have rural res zoning, such as Granite Bay, might be an acre, that are in one of those permitted zones, but is it really appropriate to have these on small lots, such as an acre? So we did just raise that to 2.3 minimum. Farm worker dwelling unit, maximum size of 1,200 square feet, which is the same as our cap for secondary dwellings. For the dormitory or barrack-style housing, the standard is 50 square feet per occupant, up to 36 occupants. That 50 square foot is a state requirement. That's meaning state law. Another key, farm workers do not need to work on the property where the employee housing is located. That's also a state law. So in theory, we can have farm worker housing in Auburn. They could be working in south of Sacramento or Elk Grove. And we have no say in the matter.
Doesn't the same farmer have to own both pieces of property, though?
No.
No?
It can be someone else that owns a properly zoned property that's providing housing for farm workers.
So you could be building rental farm housing.
Correct. We are going to have a verification form. I have one in draft form that's basically asking who owns the property, who is going to be living there, where are they working, how many hours are they working, what are they doing, what is their occupation that makes them qualify, and how long are they working there, and how long will they be occupying that unit? Is it for a month, is it 2 months, or is it year-round? So we'll have some say in that. So if you're coming in under this, there's going to be the verification form that you file with the county, the Agricultural Commission, and the Planning Division, or Agricultural Commissioner in the Planning Division will review that and approve those. If you have 5 or more workers, you have to apply to the state. Housing and Community Development has a whole section, division that reviews these and monitors farm worker housing. So if it's 5 or more units, we want to see proof that you have applied and have been approved with the state. So it's 2 levels of review. There's a lot of concern in the community that people are going to try to sneak these through and say, oh, they're farm workers staying here. Well, we're going to have some monitoring as far as who's staying there and how long they can stay there. Also, these units have to comply with all building health and safety codes if they're permanent, if they're going to be on site permanently. Some setbacks, if you're adjacent to multifamily residential or single-family residential, we want 200-foot setback from the adjacent property line. If the unit has to be 75 feet from barns or pens where livestock is housed or poultry is located, that's state law. And we're also saying that it must be removed within 45 days or converted if the agricultural employment for the unit is eliminated. However, if the work is seasonal, the unit can stay on site. It just can't be occupied. So if it's I guess in theory you could if you come in actually you can't because you have a farm zone district, so you're not allowed.
What's converted refer to?
Say if you have a 1,200 square foot residence that's farm worker housing, you stop farming the property or wherever that person was employed, that operation ceases, you can convert it to a secondary dwelling for your son or daughter. So it's converted to a legal use. Otherwise, it has to be removed. And when it's converted, then there's also the fees apply. So with that,
what applies, you say?
Fees.
Fees?
Yeah, right now, this is an agricultural use, so there's no park fee, there's no traffic mitigation fee, none of those fees. Now, if you convert it to a secondary dwelling, all those fees would kick in. And that's basically it.
Is this a form of subdivision?
No, this is just a way to provide affordable farm worker housing.
No, I mean the conversion.
A conversion would just be to get it back into compliance, get out of the farm worker housing category and into some other use, like secondary dwelling or caretaker residence. Or you remove it or convert it to storage. So with that, we're seeking a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to approve the zoning text amendment and adopt the negative declaration. There was a correction. We left out a critical word on your staff report, page 15. You have to add no, or does not need to reside on the property. Something that slipped through the cracks.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
And with that, I'll answer any questions.
Is that last little statement you made with the not, that's in state law?
It is state law. So we can't say you must work on the property where you reside.
It seems to me like we're creating an administrative nightmare for this to be, I mean, to ride shotgun on this and know it's not going to be abused, I don't see it happening.
But the state has directed.
Yeah, we thought of every scenario and then some, and trying to put the screws in of how we're going to monitor these things. And it's going to be complaint driven, and we're going to know where these units are and how long they're supposed to be occupied.
But where the guy's working, and if he's working,
Yeah,
I mean,
if
the
he's
guy gets in
working
his car
somewhere
and drives
else.
to Roseville, is he working at McDonald's or is he going to a farm to work? You know, how do we?
It's going to be the honor
not
system,
gonna happen.
and I mean,
There'll never be a conversion because it's going to bring somebody else and say they're worse.
I think we can ask for as much information as necessary to prove that they're a legitimate farm worker. So is it W-2s? Is it some kind of pay stubs? Some we don't really restrict it. We don't really say exactly what we're going to be asking for. We're not limited by that. But I think we're going to be requiring the applicant to give us enough information of who these people are, how big their families are, where they're working, and how long they're working there. Then we'll know how long these units are supposed to be occupied. And then it's an annual, you have to keep submitting every year. And then the state also, I mean, they have a very vigorous review process for the larger five employees or more.
So is there fees that go along with this that are going to cover these administrative costs, or is this?
We can't charge a fee. It's basically over-the-counter permit.
What happens if we tell the state no?
Oh, you don't want to go there.
Nothing until we get sued.
Personally, I would love to go there, as a matter of fact. I got to ask the question, what happens if we're not in compliance?
Okay. If we're not in compliance, we have the next round of our housing element update coming up. And many of you weren't here for that, some of you were. When we go through the housing element update, which is required every 5 years.
It's update every 8.
Pardon me, I stand corrected, every 8 years. Our housing element then goes to the state for verification that we're in compliance with the law. And one of the things they look at is how many programs have you implemented from your prior housing element? if worse comes to worse, and we're not up to snuff with the state, it could come to the point where we couldn't issue building permits, approve projects. There's some fairly serious hammers as to not being in compliance with our housing element. It's the one element that is scrutinized a great deal by the state. So plus, not to mention the fact that there are numerous affordable housing advocate groups that are watching jurisdictions all around the state as to what they're doing with their affordable housing and their housing element. The one thing I wanted to point out that Chris mentioned, but is an important factor with this farm worker housing, is for either the farm worker dwelling units or the complex, the proponent has to obtain a permit from the state. So there is the extra layer of state watching of these kind of complexes being established.
That's with 5 or more, correct? That he's got to go to the state?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
5 or more for to require
Correct.
state approval. 5 or less, he can just do it.
Right, and that would be similar to, remember, we have in numerous parts of our codes, including things such as the, trying to remember what they're called, there is the threshold, if you're 4 and under, and this one is 5 and under, you're considered to be a family, a residential unit, and cannot be regulated as other than. So we are talking about the larger units here.
Does this help mitigate Placer County's low-income requirements?
When you say mitigate?
Well, I mean, I know there's you have to meet certain standards. And I know does it help satisfy it?
Yes, because this is one of the programs that we've had on the books for quite some time. This has been worked on for, I don't know, Chris, how long? 2 years that we've been working on this?
It's been in various draft forms for a couple of years.
Right. But it is one of the programs out there that staff felt was something that could be addressed, could be achieved, has gone to great lengths to. The what-ifs have been discussed for a long time. So yes, it does help us to achieve one of the programs in our housing element.
Now, if you had this, why can't you put basically the last item we talked on in the same agricultural zoning, whether it's farm worker housing or somebody else, that's growing grapes, if they have them coming in there for a, month, 3-month period doing farm work, I mean, isn't it compatible for both if it's a single room use? Just something.
Jeff, Karen didn't mention, but if a determination is made that we are not in compliance, then the chairman of the planning commission goes to jail.
I'm all right with that.
You'll see.
I won't be chairman after the first of the year. None of this will come down till then.
And no one else will want to be chairman either.
We do have someone from the public here also.
Maybe I'm still a little bit confused, but just a couple thoughts. Okay, if I'm in a highway zone and I have one of these units, a dwelling unit for ag workers, I call it a SRO, right?
You could.
But if I'm in the ag zone, I call it a barracks or something else, right?
And then it's no use permit.
Huh?
And then there's no use permit.
In either case.
No, I mean,
If you've changed, put ag in with the zone agriculture.
you wouldn't be
So
able
I
to.
think I just answered my previous question. But at any rate, in either case, there's no use permit because you can have a
SRO would need a use permit in that.
Huh?
An SRO would require a use permit in the highway service.
Well, if we follow
If we
follow
change
through
it.
on what the commission was recommending, it wouldn't now.
Go into that.
Yeah, they could qualify as just regular SRO units, and we wouldn't have to verify that they're farm workers.
Yeah. And so that's the difference in this zone, but the requirements would be the same. There's no permit required. Okay, that answers my question from earlier. And so just to get a couple more clarifications, so you know, somebody owns TPZ land, and they're desirous of building a house, and so they use this right here, this, to build a caretaker residence
We do allow caretaker today.
in TPZ?
In the existing,
Right.
yes.
And so they meet the criteria initially, but then they really desire to have a house, so they say, well, I'm no longer a caretaker, I'm going to convert it. So what's the process there?
Well, it would be a use permit for TPZ, for a caretaker house. So to convert it to a regular house,
You would not be able to do that.
Would not be able to?
Yeah, the TPC zoning only allows for caretaker's quarters. It does not allow for single-family dwellings.
Okay. That answers that question. And let me see, you're talking about mining and timber harvesting. Oftentimes mining occurs under the both permits from the public agency as well as the county. So do these rules apply for these structures on public land or just on private land?
that's a good question. I guess it would apply, since it's, even if it's federal land, that we would
Federal
have the same say over what these units look like and if they're permanent and how long you can occupy them.
Okay. So an example,
Where the
a few-
tents come out.
a few years ago, the Forest Service decided to convert a house in Forest Hill into a barracks. So under these rules, if they wanted to do that, they would have to apply to the county for a permit. I mean, well, they would just do it by right then, wouldn't they?
Was it on federal land?
Yeah.
They don't have to go
It's
to
pr-
the county for a permit.
It's probably a use
By right.
permit, I imagine.
But if somebody else wants to do it, build a structure on their mining claim on public land, they'd have to go through the county.
Right.
Or they wouldn't, because it'd be permitted by right.
It would be a permit to the county. I don't believe it matters who the owner is. If it's on federal land, if someone wants to put a housing unit on federal land,
If it's on federal land, we wouldn't have jurisdiction.
Yeah, we don't have jurisdiction over any state or federal lands.
that's just that.
Any other questions? All right, how about public? Would you like to address it? Just line up back there and we'll start the timer and.
Okay, no, I'm really quick. Okay, I have a real concern about this one because of the county is almost entirely RAs, almost entirely, if you look at a map. And that, those little A's there say that they can just go over the counter and get the permission and build it, just like the Cs. And we can only hope that the planning is going to set up all these rules and questions to protect everybody. And I'm glad to see that he added the, which they're allowed to do, a minimum size, but I don't think 2.3 is big enough. I think the county should set a rule that it should be greater than 4.6 per acre, or even a 10-acre minimum, to make sure that it's not going to be abused with all the little residential areas we have throughout the county. And you can't charge a fee, you can't increase the taxes for these things, so there is going to be abuse. And the county's relying on this complaint-driven enforcement of the code, which I already know that the code enforcement office is so short-handed, it takes months just to even look at a complaint. And so I would ask that the commissioners ask that the minimum acreage be increased substantially to help prevent a proliferation. And if these are in 2.3 acre areas, it's going to affect everybody's property values and eventually affect the state coffers. Thank you.
How big does a parcel need to be right now to have a caretaker's home? Isn't that 10?
There's no minimum parcel size. There's also no limit on the size of the house. So no minimum parcel size and no cap on the size of the house in the current ordinance.
6,000-foot caretaker house.
The unidentified speaker who spoke publicly a minute ago was Muriel Davis from Penryn. I don't think your name was on the record. She's making the argument that there's a correlation between the size of the underlying parcel and the protection for the public from the proliferation of these things. Chris, did you address that in your considerations?
We did, originally we didn't even have a minimum. This was, if you have the zoning, you qualify. And that's basically what the state reads. And actually, you're supposed to allow these in any zone district you allow farming. And if you look at our zoning ordinance, we allow it across the board, commercial, industrial, all of them. I think there's only 2 we don't allow farming in. So if we interpreted the state law as written and how it sounds, we should be allowing these just about everywhere as of right. Karen's allowed us to dial it back a little bit. Here are your true agricultural parcels, and here's where you're most likely to see the need, or where they're most logically, where you find your ag uses on these on this zoning. So we have dialed it back. We have it to 6, which is double of what we had previously. We're meeting the spirit and intent of the law. I don't think we've been challenged. We spoke to Legal Services in Northern California. They were happy with the 6 we chose. Ag Commission's happy with the 6 we chose. We also think the parcel size for the permanent residences, a lot of these are going to be in rural areas. So 12 units on septic, I think you're not going to get that on a 1 acre parcel.
What you're hearing from the commission, I think, and from the public is the potential for abuse. And we all understand how it will be used when it's properly used, and no objection. Is there anything in the state law that addresses minimum parcel size, or would that be a necessary fallout from the bullets you had up there that said they still have to comply with building health and safety codes?
I think that's a fallout from the health and safety codes. You have to show us that you have water and sewer capability if you're keeping these there for a certain period of time.
Or septic or something.
Right, so they'll go through that normal review. It's just the zoning clearance is basically you're in the right zone. Planning's the only other involvement we would have would be show us your verification form. And then you're off to other departments for your approvals for building permits if you need them.
Looks like we've heard from everybody from the public. We'll close that off and come back and have discussions, motions.
I don't know that we have much choice but to follow the state law, and I think staff's done as good at handling this as could be done under the circumstances. So, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I would like to move that we forward a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors for adoption of the negative declaration and approval of the amendments to the zoning ordinances, including the CEQA zoning text amendment findings that are in our staff report and the conditions that are attached, as well as the corrected errata sheet containing the corrected language of the proposed zoning change.
Second.
Seconded twice. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We're done.
Thank you.